Has the plot to bring Harry back to the UK made a nightmare return? Did Meghan actually ghost her gravely ill father? And did Queen Camilla have notes for the actor playing a character inspired by her ex, Andrew Parker Bowles?
Prince Harry's latest move isn't being read as desperation inside royal circles, it's being dissected as strategy. Experts now argue that what looks like a plea for safety is, in reality, a carefully timed attempt to force a return to the UK on his own terms. Behind palace walls, alarms are quietly sounding. Media sympathy is splintering. Public patience is thinning. And King Charles's silence is no accident. Is this Harry's boldest gamble yet, or the move that backfires most? Stay with us as we break it all down. The move experts say was never about safety. Inside the royal palace, power rarely announces itself. It is exercised through silence, restraint, and an unspoken understanding of hierarchy. Every decision is weighed not just for its impact today, but for how it might shift the balance tomorrow. At a time when the monarchy is already navigating illness, succession planning, and public scrutiny, even a single move from the outside can send ripples through the entire structure. This is the tense backdrop against which Prince Harry's latest actions are now being examined. Royal experts say the palace has been operating in a state of controlled caution. King Charles is managing his reign under the shadow of health concerns, while Prince William and Catherine are increasingly viewed as the stabilizing core of the institution's future. In such a moment, clarity of roles is everything. Those who sit at the top must appear unified, decisive, and unchallenged. Any attempt to blur those lines, experts warn, risks reopening old fractures the monarchy worked hard to seal. It is within this fragile equilibrium that Prince Harry's renewed push for UK security has landed, quietly, but with enormous implications. At the center of the dispute is his demand for automatic, taxpayer-funded armed police protection whenever he is in the United Kingdom. That protection was removed in early 2020 after he stepped back from royal duties and relocated abroad. The reasoning was clear. Such protection is reserved for working members of the royal family, whose roles require constant public exposure. Harry challenged that decision in court, arguing that proper procedures had not been followed and that ongoing threats justified continued protection. He lost. He appealed. He lost again. The courts ruled that because he no longer lives or works in the UK, his security should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, not guaranteed in advance. What has unsettled experts is not the legal history, but what came next. Harry requested a fresh Home Office review, claiming that his security arrangements have not been reassessed since he left Britain. On the surface, the request sounds administrative, but royal commentators argue the framing is deliberate. They point out that Harry has repeatedly described security as the only thing stopping him from returning to the UK with his children and spending meaningful time there. By narrowing the issue to a single obstacle, critics say he shifts the conversation from law to morality, implying that if protection is restored, his return becomes both reasonable and overdue. Experts stress that automatic police protection is about more than safety. It confers status and signals national importance. Restoring it would quietly reverse one of the clearest consequences of Harry's royal exit. Strip away the language of fear, they argue, and what emerges is not vulnerability, but intent. But is this really about safety, or about reclaiming something far bigger? Stay with us. Why experts call it a nightmare plot. Royal commentators are careful to clarify one thing from the outset. The so-called nightmare plot has nothing to do with Prince Harry simply visiting the UK. Experts stress that no one is alarmed by a son seeing his father or a duke attending charity events. The concern lies elsewhere, and it is far more structural. The phrase nightmare plot, as analysts use it, refers to the consequences of security approval, not physical presence. According to experts, granting Harry automatic, state-backed police protection would do more than address safety. It would quietly restore a form of official status that was deliberately removed when he stepped away from royal duties in 2020. And once that status is reinstated, critics warn, a chain reaction becomes difficult to stop. Automatic security is not a neutral benefit. In royal terms, it signals that an individual is still considered a protected figure of national importance. Experts argue that this designation would blur the line between a private citizen living abroad and a senior royal operating within the state framework. That distinction, they say, is the very line the monarchy fought to preserve after Harry and Meghan's exit. From there, commentators outline the wider implications. If Harry qualifies for permanent protection, questions immediately arise about residency. Not formal reinstatement as a working royal, perhaps, but extended stays, semi-permanent presence, and renewed visibility within Britain. Security approval would make that possible, even comfortable. And with visibility comes influence. Experts also point to public funding as a critical fault line. Automatic protection means taxpayer resources at a time when public finances are under strain and scrutiny is high. Critics warn that this would provoke backlash, not only against Harry, but against the monarchy itself, which would inevitably be seen as complicit, regardless of formal involvement. This is why analysts insist the issue is not emotional, personal, or punitive. It is institutional. They argue the monarchy functions on clear boundaries. Once those boundaries are weakened, they are rarely restored. Granting security would not exist in isolation. It would recalibrate Harry's position within the national ecosystem. Perhaps most unsettling to experts is the precedent it would set. If stepping away from royal duties no longer carries permanent consequences, what message does that send? That roles can be rejected, criticized, and monetized, yet later partially reclaimed through legal and political pressure. That is why commentators use such stark language. The nightmare plot is not about intent to cause harm. It is about unintended outcomes. A single approval, experts warn, could reopen doors that were closed for a reason, and once reopened, they may never fully shut again. So, if granting security risks reopening sealed doors, why is the palace choosing silence instead of resistance? Keep watching to find out. Palace, reaction, silence, distance, and control. From the outside, the palace response to Prince Harry's latest moves looks almost passive. There have been no fiery denials, no emotional statements, no visible effort to shut the story down. But royal experts insist this apparent quiet is neither accidental nor weak. It is deliberate, disciplined, and tightly controlled. Officially, the palace position is clear in its restraint. There has been no public endorsement of Harry's security review request and no attempt to influence the process. Buckingham Palace has carefully avoided commentary, allowing the matter to sit squarely where it legally belongs, with the Home Office and the Independent Security Review framework. Insiders stress that this distance is intentional. Any visible interference would immediately raise constitutional concerns and expose the monarch to accusations of favoritism or political pressure. Experts point to the structure of the decision-making process itself. Security arrangements are assessed by a committee that includes senior police figures, Home Office representatives, and a royal household presence. While the king does not directly dictate outcomes, his institution is represented. Analysts describe this as indirect influence rather than command. The palace can signal caution, context, and consequence without ever issuing an order. That, experts say, is how control is exercised in a modern monarchy. Palace insiders emphasize that silence should not be mistaken for uncertainty. On the contrary, it reflects a hardened understanding of how previous engagement backfired. After years of interviews, documentaries, and memoir revelations, the royal household has learned that every word spoken publicly can be repurposed, reframed, or monetized. Silence removes oxygen. It prevents escalation. And crucially, it avoids giving Harry any narrative momentum he could use to argue reconciliation is already underway. This strategy also highlights the central tension faced King Charles: father versus monarch. As a father, Charles is believed to want reconciliation, particularly as he undergoes cancer treatment and reflects on his legacy. As king, however, his duty is institutional stability. Experts argue that Charles understands that any emotional gesture made publicly would be read as a political concession. By maintaining distance, he protects the crown from appearing reactive or divided. That calculation becomes even more complex when Prince William and Catherine are factored in. Palace sources suggest their concerns carry significant weight internally. William, as heir, is focused on long-term stability and public trust. Catherine, whose popularity remains exceptionally high, represents continuity and calm. Experts say there is little appetite within their camp for reopening wounds or introducing a disruptive parallel narrative at a time when the monarchy is already under strain. In this context, the palace's silence becomes a form of control. It keeps the timeline slow, the stakes contained, and the pressure external. Analysts argue that this is not about punishing Harry, but about refusing to be maneuvered into decisions driven by emotion, media cycles, or public sympathy. Ultimately, experts describe the palace reaction as strategic patience. By saying nothing, the monarchy avoids validating the premise of Harry's campaign. And in royal terms, that restraint may be the strongest signal of all. The institution is watching, weighing, and refusing to be rushed. So, what finally happens when silence is met with a direct plea? Was this the moment everything changed? Stay with us. The summit, where Charles ignored Harry royal experts, now point to one defining moment earlier this year as the turning point that explains everything Prince Harry has done since. It was the high-level summit where Harry, according to multiple insiders, made a direct and personal plea for reconciliation. Expectations were high. With King Charles's health concerns, mounting public pressure, and years of silence behind them, this was widely seen as Harry's chance to reset the relationship. Instead, it became the moment the palace drew its clearest line. According to analysts familiar with the meeting, Harry's message was emotional and urgent. He reportedly framed his appeal around family, time, and regret, stressing the need for dialogue while there was still an opportunity. But what stunned observers was not what Harry said, but what Charles did not say. Experts describe the king's response as restrained to the point of absence. There were no warm words, no language of reconciliation, no commitments to further talks. Most tellingly, there was no follow-up. Royal commentators emphasize that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate choice. In royal terms, silence is communication. Analysts say Charles refused to engage meaningfully because any public or semi-public acknowledgement would have carried implications far beyond a private family moment. The palace understood that even the smallest concession could be interpreted as a shift in policy, an invitation to renegotiate boundaries that were set when Harry stepped away from royal duties. What made the summit especially significant was its context. This was not a casual exchange. It followed years of televised interviews that had deeply damaged trust. By the time of the meeting, experts say the palace had concluded that reconciliation cannot be staged, mediated, or rushed under pressure. It must happen privately, without cameras or leverage. Harry's appeal, however sincere, came against a backdrop of ongoing media exposure, and that, analysts argue, made meaningful engagement impossible. This is why experts describe the summit as the clearest signal yet that the palace will not negotiate publicly. Emotional appeals, however human, will not override institutional risk. The monarchy operates on precedent. If one boundary is softened under pressure, others inevitably follow. Charles, as king, chose containment over compassion in that moment. Crucially, experts link this summit directly to Harry's latest move. After failing to secure engagement through emotional appeal, Harry pivoted to process. Instead of seeking dialogue, he returned to legal and administrative mechanisms, reviving the security issue as his primary battleground. Analysts argue this was not coincidence, but consequence. When the emotional route closed, the strategic one reopened. In that sense, the summit reframes everything that followed. It explains why Harry shifted his narrative toward safety and obstruction, and why experts now view his actions less as reconciliation and more as leverage. The king's refusal to engage did not end the conflict, it redirected it. And in the eyes of royal experts, that quiet moment of non-response may have set the stage for the very nightmare plot now causing such alarm. But once the palace stayed silent, did the press begin to see Harry differently? Stay with us. From sympathy to suspicion. The media reaction to Prince Harry's latest moves has undergone a noticeable and telling transformation. What began with a wave of sympathetic coverage has gradually hardened into skepticism, with many outlets now questioning not just his methods, but his motives. Experts say this shift in tone is one of the clearest indicators that the narrative surrounding Harry has changed, and perhaps permanently. In the early stages, headlines painted Harry as isolated and emotionally stranded. Stories focused on his strained relationship with his father, his exclusion from royal life, and the human cost of family estrangement. Coverage emphasized his comments about missing Britain, fearing for his children's safety, and wanting reconciliation while there was still time. For a moment, the media lens was soft. Harry was portrayed less as a disruptor and more as a wounded son, navigating loss, regret, and distance. That tone began to change the moment news emerged of his request for a renewed Home Office security review. Suddenly, the framing shifted from emotion to intent. Commentators started asking why a case that had already been legally settled was being reopened. Analysts highlighted that Harry had lost both the initial legal challenge and the appeal, and that no substantial change in circumstances had occurred. The question quickly moved from, "Why is Harry hurting?" to, "What is Harry trying to achieve?" From that point on, suspicion replaced sympathy. Editorials and broadcast panels began dissecting Harry's language, particularly his repeated insistence that security was the sole barrier preventing him from returning to Britain. Media analysts argued this was an oversimplification that ignored the consequences of his own choices in 2020. The idea that protection alone stood between Harry and a UK return began to sound, to many commentators, like a narrative designed to pressure institutions rather than address reality. Royal experts appearing across major outlets reinforced this view. They stressed that Harry is not barred from visiting Britain and is not left unprotected. What he lacks is automatic, permanent, taxpayer-funded security. That distinction became central to media coverage. As one commentator put it, the issue was no longer about safety, but about status. And status, critics argued, was the real prize. The British press, in particular, turned sharply critical. Tabloids and broadsheets alike questioned whether the public should shoulder additional financial burden during a cost-of-living crisis. Past grievances resurfaced. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and the memoir, Spare, were re-examined through a harsher lens. Commentators asked whether someone who had repeatedly criticized the monarchy should expect the privileges of royal life to be restored. The prevailing mood in UK coverage shifted toward frustration and fatigue. In the United States, the reaction was more restrained, but no less telling. American outlets that once embraced Harry and Meghan's narrative of escape and self-determination began adopting a more cautious tone. Legal analysts and political commentators raised questions about international security obligations and the implications for U.S. taxpayers. Sympathy gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to concern. Experts now describe a growing media consensus on both sides of the Atlantic. This is no longer a story about personal protection. It is about leverage, optics, and influence. The press has moved from chronicling Harry's pain to interrogating his strategy. And once that shift occurs, it is difficult to reverse. In the end, the media fallout has reshaped the battlefield. Sympathy once fueled Harry's narrative. Now, scrutiny defines it. And experts warn that in the court of public opinion, suspicion is far harder to dislodge than silence. Public reaction turns cold. Public reaction to Prince Harry's latest push has shifted decisively, and experts say the mood in Britain is now far colder than it was just a few years ago. Where sympathy once existed, it has been steadily replaced by frustration, skepticism, and a growing sense that the public has moved on. One of the most significant factors shaping this reaction is the cost of living pressure facing the UK. With households grappling with rising energy bills, higher taxes, and economic uncertainty, the idea of restoring taxpayer-funded protection to a non-working royal has struck a nerve. Experts note that public tolerance for perceived privilege is at a low point. In this climate, arguments framed around entitlement, even indirectly, are met with immediate resistance. That resistance has reignited backlash over security. Many members of the public remember clearly why automatic protection was removed in the first place. When Harry and Meghan stepped away from royal duties in 2020, the understanding was that privileges tied to service would end. Experts say that for many Britons, the issue feels settled. Attempts to revisit it now are viewed not as a safety necessity, but as an attempt to renegotiate a deal the public never agreed to revisit. Polling commentary and public forums reflect this shift. Call-in shows, comment sections, and social media debates show declining sympathy for Harry's position. While some still express compassion for the family rift, far fewer support the idea of public money being used to facilitate his return. Analysts observe a recurring theme in public opinion. Empathy does not equal obligation. As the debate intensifies, Harry and Meghan's past public attacks on the monarchy have resurfaced in force. The Oprah interview, the Netflix series, and Harry's memoir Spare are repeatedly cited by critics as reasons trust has eroded. Experts say these moments now work against Harry rather than for him, reinforcing the perception that he wants the benefits of royal life without accepting its responsibilities or constraints. In this context, experts warn that public forgiveness has effectively expired. The British public, they argue, is willing to understand disagreement, but not repeated grievance paired with renewed demands. The mood is not hostile but hardened, and once public sentiment reaches that point, analysts say it becomes one of the most powerful forces shaping how institutions respond. So, if public forgiveness is gone, why does Harry appear to be shifting tactics now? And what is he really trying to reset? Stay tuned. Project Thaw and the PR push royal experts increasingly view Prince Harry's recent actions through the lens of what has become known in royal circles as Project Thaw. The phrase, used informally by insiders and commentators, refers to an alleged effort to thaw frozen relations between the Sussexes, the palace, and the British public. While never officially acknowledged, experts argue the pattern of behavior surrounding Harry's recent UK appearances fits the strategy too neatly to ignore. Central to this analysis is Harry's September visit to Britain. On the surface, it appeared benign, even positive. He arrived smiling, engaged warmly with the public, and made a highly publicized charitable donation reportedly exceeding £1 million to causes supporting children in need. He attended events with carefully managed optics, projecting calm, generosity, and approachability. To many observers, it looked like a soft reset. Experts, however, dissect that visit as a calculated PR exercise rather than a spontaneous homecoming. They note how every appearance was controlled, every interaction photographed, and every message carefully framed. Meetings were pre-arranged, narratives preset. Analysts argue the goal was not reconciliation behind closed doors, but image rehabilitation in public view. In other words, Project Thaw was not aimed at healing relationships privately, but at warming perception externally. Royal commentators stress that optics matter in monarchy, but they are not enough. Donations and smiles may shift headlines temporarily, but they do not address the underlying breach of trust caused by years of public criticism. Experts point out that no apology accompanied the visit. There was no acknowledgement of harm, no signal of restraint going forward. Instead, the emphasis remained on visibility and goodwill without accountability. Palace skepticism has only deepened as a result. Insiders suggest that while the optics were noted, they were not persuasive. In fact, continued leaks and media briefings during and after the visit reinforced long-standing fears. Each report, each unnamed source, confirmed to the palace that discretion remains a problem. For an institution built on confidentiality, that is a fundamental obstacle. Experts also note the contrast between the palace's restraint and the Sussex camp's continued engagement with media narratives. While Buckingham Palace remained silent, stories continued to emerge, framing the visit as progress and hinting at reconciliation. Analysts argue this imbalance undermined any goodwill the PR push might have generated. In the end, Project Thaw is viewed by experts as a strategic miscalculation. Public relations can soften edges, but it cannot replace responsibility. Without clear boundaries, genuine remorse, and sustained silence, experts say no amount of positive optics will convince the palace to reopen doors it deliberately closed. And with each leak, skepticism hardens further, making reconciliation not just distant, but increasingly unlikely. The rival court experts fear. The real danger doesn't lie in whether Harry returns, but in what his return would create. Because once two royal narratives exist side by side, control becomes almost impossible to maintain. This is where concerns escalate from family tension to what analysts openly describe as a royal nightmare. At the center of that fear is the prospect of a rival court forming in plain sight. Experts explain that a Sussex return, even on a limited or informal basis, would inevitably hijack media attention. Harry and Meghan remain global figures, and any presence in the UK would generate headlines regardless of their official status. Analysts warn that every appearance, visit, or charitable event would be framed as a counter-narrative to the working royals, pulling focus away from the monarchy's core duties and messaging. In an era driven by clicks and conflict, comparison would be unavoidable. That media disruption, experts argue, carries serious consequences for Prince William's future reign. As heir, William is working to project stability, continuity, and quiet service. A highly visible Sussex presence would fracture that image, forcing constant contrast between two royal paths: duty versus dissent, restraint versus exposure. Commentators warn that this dynamic could undermine William's authority long before he ascends the throne, weakening public confidence in a unified monarchy. More troubling, analysts say, is the creation of a parallel royal narrative. Even without titles or formal roles, Harry and Meghan could operate in the public imagination as an alternative royal brand. Their engagements, speeches, and charitable initiatives would be interpreted through a royal lens, regardless of disclaimers. Experts caution that this effectively creates two centers of attention competing for legitimacy, sympathy, and influence. Concerns extend beyond optics to logistics. Overlapping engagements could dilute impact. Conflicting messaging could confuse the public. Divided loyalty among charities, supporters, and even Commonwealth partners could emerge. Experts note that monarchy relies on clarity and hierarchy. A rival narrative disrupts both. This is why the phrase royal nightmare crystallizes here. It captures not malice, but structural chaos. Analysts stress that the issue is not whether Harry intends to undermine the monarchy, but whether his return would inevitably destabilize it. In systems built on symbolism and continuity, intention matters less than effect. Experts conclude that once a parallel court exists, even informally, it becomes nearly impossible to contain. Media attention, public curiosity, and internal strain would feed it naturally. And for an institution already navigating modernization, illness at the top, and global scrutiny, this is the scenario the palace is most determined to prevent. So if the real threat isn't intent, but impact, why did Charles choose silence as his first move? Stay with us. Why Charles is holding the line. Royal experts say the reason King Charles is holding the line now can be traced directly back to his earlier silence. That moment was not an emotional failure or a lack of compassion, but a strategic decision that continues to shape the palace's response. According to analysts, ignoring Harry's plea was not cruel. It was containment. By refusing to engage publicly or offer reassurances, Charles signaled that reconciliation would not be negotiated under pressure. Experts stress that the king understands the difference between private family healing and institutional risk. Any visible concession, especially after years of public criticism, would have carried consequences far beyond a father-son relationship. This is why experts caution against confusing the security review with reconciliation. Allowing a process to proceed does not mean the palace has softened its stance. Analysts say the review exists to assess risk, not to reopen doors. It is procedural, not personal. Palace strategy, experts explain, is rooted in patience. The approach is simple but firm. Wait, observe, and do not react. No headlines, no counter-narratives, no emotional responses. Time, rather than confrontation, is being used as the stabilizing force. In the end, experts agree the door has not been slammed shut, but it is no longer in Harry's hands. Any future movement will come on the palace's terms, not through leverage or pressure. And that shift in control may be the most decisive outcome of all. So, what do you think? Has Prince Harry's push to return crossed from family dispute into a national test after King Charles stayed silent? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.